Hello and welcome to Japan Explained. One of my patrons asked me to do an episode on Japanese art. By the way, you can do that too. Just check out the support page on japanexplained.com and find what works best for you. While I loved the request, I felt a little lost, honestly. What do you call Japanese art? Buddhist sculpture? Nihon ga sumie? Does calligraphy count? And while all of these things are considered Japanese art, most people will not think of any of the above when they hear the word. Instead, they probably think of the Great Wave, the beauties of Utamaro, the plum garden in a Van Gogh painting, or some other ukiyo-e prints. We know ukiyo-e as the masterpieces of the Japanese art, but they were not meant to be. During the Edo period, ukiyo-e prints were part of the popular culture, cheap everyday objects, sort of magazines. Were they even considered art? Were they collected? Did painters become rich and famous making them? I had so many questions I couldn't answer, so I decided that ukiyo-e would be the perfect subject for this episode. First of all, let's understand what ukiyo-e actually stands for. E means picture, and ukiyo is literally translated as a floating world. What is that? In Buddhism, ukiyo refers to the transient and unreliable world we live in. Everything here is fleeting and temporary, and a devoted person should avoid all the temptations of this world and instead concentrate on lasting spiritual matters. And for many centuries, everyone was happy with this definition. But then, the Edo period began, and the mentality of the people of Edo was drastically different from that of Buddhist monks. If all the pleasures of this world are fleeting, they thought, let us enjoy them now. And when we talk about the pleasures of Edo, we are mainly talking about the entertainment and pleasure districts. This was the new ukiyo. And if you're learning Japanese, you might be interested to know that the characters used to write the word changed at the time. The kanji for melancholy and sadness gave way to the characters that meant floating, rising to the surface. Soon the term spread to all urban pleasures such as fashion, dining and festivals, all things fun. Ukiyo-e became synonymous with contemporary, fashionable and cool. Ukiyo-e were depictions of this world of fun and pleasure. They had no use for dull and mundane, and that's what they were loved for. Like the fleeting pleasures they depicted, most ukiyo-e were not meant to last. They were cut and folded to decorate fans, painted on walls and sliding doors, or carried as travel guides. They were meant to be enjoyed. And after that, well, do what you like with them. Before we go any further, there is one thing I would like to mention at the very beginning. All the most famous ukiyo-e are woodblock prints, and so people often think that ukiyo-e and Japanese woodblock prints are two words that mean exactly the same thing. They're not. Ukiyo-e is a genre or a style of art, woodblock is a medium. So, while ukiyo-e prints are more famous, there are also many hand-drawn ukiyo-e. The same is true for woodblock prints. The most famous prints are ukiyo-e, but woodblock printing was also used for Buddhist art, books, labels, and many other things. And just as ukiyo-e were made with different materials and methods, their prices varied greatly. The custom-made prints or paintings were expensive. The limited editions were somewhere in the middle, and mass-produced prints were affordable for everyone, costing not much more than a bowl of soba noodles. Were they even considered art at this price? Good question. But since we can't travel back in time, scholars argue about that. Are photographs or postcard illustrations art? What about AI images? There is a lot of room for personal opinion here, but people did think they were pretty. Now that we've established what ukiyo is and what it isn't, let's see how it emerged, became popular, died out, and then was reborn. In old books about Ukiyo-e, the birth of the genre was associated with a man called Iwasama Tabei. He mixed techniques from the Kano and Tosa schools and sometimes chose subjects considered too low for a painter. But yet his works were made for the nobility. Who else could pay for lavishly decorated hanging scrolls and folding screens covered in gold leaf? Today, Iwasama Tabei is no longer considered the father of ukiyo-e, but his painting styles marks the transition of art into the new era, and so he is seen more as a grandfather. As time went on, more and more artists drew scenes from everyday life. Not the mundane, of course, but the ukiyo. And now we are somewhere in the middle of the 17th century. The city of Edo is growing rapidly, so does the printing industry. Although printing had been known in Japan for much longer, the growth of urban centers in the late 16th and early 17th centuries meant that it was now available to ordinary people. Most urban dwellers were at least somewhat literate and had disposable income, so they bought books for their entertainment. Kanazoshi books were perfect for these readers. They loved short stories about contemporary life written in simple kana script with little or no kanji. And there were pictures too, monochrome and printed in black ink from a single woodblock, but pictures of contemporary life. It was one of these books that popularized the term ukiyo, the floating world. Written by Asai Ryoi, himself a Buddhist monk and well aware of the classical meaning of ukiyo, Ukiyo Monogatari tells the story of a priest named Ukiyobo, who attains enlightenment through a life of pleasure-seeking. Mocking all things serious, the book also showed the pleasures of city life, and the people of Edo loved it. Going back to the pictures in these books, they were numerous, but they were only perceived as a part of the book. One man would change that, and he would be called the father of ukiyo-e. His name is Hishikawa Moronobu. And as you can see, he didn't invent the genre of ukiyo-e, nor was he the first artist to illustrate books with pictures of contemporary life. So, what exactly did he do? The first prints attributed to Hishikawa Moronobu were published in 1671, but they were still book illustrations. He made lots of them, as well as hand-painted hanging scrolls and folding screens. Moronobu is one of the few ukiyo-e artists whose paintings are actually more famous than his prints. For example, Mikaeri Bijin, Beauty Turning Back. Funnily enough, we don't really see the face of the beauty, but we do see that her kimono and hairstyle are very fashionable, glamorous, and impeccable. By the 1680s, Moronobu had become famous for his depictions of the Yoshiwara red light district and the Kabuki theater. And that's when he, or perhaps his publisher, had the idea of selling his works one print at a time instead of binding them into a book. Mass-produced black and white prints were cheap and affordable for everyone. You could buy one or several from the same series. This way, Moronobu's art reached all social classes, making him an artist of the masses. This also made ukiyo-e the art of the masses, turning it into the cultural phenomena we know today. The prints that Moronobu made, and by made I mean he drew the designs for them, he wasn't involved in making the prints themselves, but more on that later, are known as sumi-zuri-e. Sumi is ink, zuri comes from the word suru, to rub or print, and e means picture. The original drawing was transformed into a single block of wood, then carved and covered with ink. A sheet of paper was placed on top and rubbed to transfer the ink evenly. The result looked like a page from a coloring book. No wonder the prints were soon hand-painted by artisans to make them even more attractive. The orange, rust-colored and yellow mineral paint used for this was known as tan, and pictures painted with it became known as tane. The fashion took off in the 1690s and lasted for almost 30 years. As Moronobu died in 1694, he wasn't able to enjoy tane much, but the newly established Torii school took full advantage of it. The next great ukiyo-e artist, Tori Kiyonobu was the son of a kabuki actor and a painter of theater billboards. Following his father's footsteps as a billboard painter, he soon became famous and branched out into drawing kabuki actors for prints. Reflecting the influence of poster design, Kiyonobu's prints depicted the actors in a robust and vigorous style, often referred to as hyotanashi mimizugaki. The actors' legs were drawn in the shape of hyotan guards to create the illusion of strength and power, while mimizugaki, or worm drawing, created a sense of dramatic chaos by using lines that looked like wheeling worms. The style was perfectly in tune with the spirit of kabuki plays and made Kiyonobu very successful, setting the style for the Torii school for generations to come. Around 1719 or 20, tanye gave way to the still hand-painted but more colorful benie. Instead of mineral tan, artisans now used plant-based beni paint, which allowed them to create a full range of greenish, reddish and yellowish colors. Although this meant more work and higher production prices, publishers were willing to take risks and compete with each other to make their prints the most attractive to customers. To make the images even brighter, they sometimes added hide glue or urushi lacquer to the black ink. This produced a vivid and lustrous black that perfectly complemented the red color of beni. Such prints were called urushi-e. For these developments in coloring and many other innovations, we have only one man to thank, Okumura Masanobu. The self-taught artist took the best of Moronobu and Kiyonobu. He drew both Yoshiwara beauties and kabuki actors, tried Sumizuri-e and tanye. He is also credited as the inventor of benie and urushi-e and as the first person to use gold dust and mica powder on woodblock prints. Also, this is not proven. In the 1720s, he decided to start his own publishing business and did so successfully. Playing with the quality and size of paper, he produced the first diptychs, triptychs, and hashira-e pillar prints. Masanobu never stopped experimenting with his art. He tried his hand at landscape and warrior prints and learned European perspective from Dutch paintings. It is also said that he was the first, or at least one of the first ones, to experiment with color prints in the early 1740s. Officially, though, the first colored prints were made in 1744 by the publisher Emiya Kichiemon. At least that's what Otananpo wrote, and we have nothing to prove otherwise. These first attempts at color printing are known as benizuri-e. In addition to the main block printed in black ink, 2 or 3 color blocks were added. One with red ink, one with green ink, and one with yellow ink. To make the colors match the lines of the main image, the printers had to place the paper in exactly the same position on each block. And that's difficult, especially when you have to print more than 100. So, to make it easier for the printers, someone decided to carve marks into blocks. These marks are called kento. And although we don't know who exactly invented it, it was a huge step in the history of Japanese printing and ukiyo-e. Over the next 20 years, carvers and printers improved their techniques to produce perfectly matching colorful prints. An artist of the Torii school, as well as the keen innovator Masanobu, produced many beautiful benizuri-e prints. It's a pity that Masanobu died in 1764, because just 1 year later, ukiyo would be truly revolutionized. During the Edo period, Japan counted time using the lunisolar calendar. Setting the calendar for the coming year was a complicated and very important matter for the government, so much so that publishers who wanted to sell calendars had to obtain a special license. But the calendars themselves were very simple. They just had to tell you how many days there were in each month, 29 or 30. Not much to fill in, and so egoyomi, picture calendars, became popular. Literary circles or patrons of arts commissioned custom-made calendars to give to their club members or friends. Being custom-made, they were expensive, but also of a high quality. They were made by better covers and printers and used the finest materials such as hoso paper or gold and silver powder. And the ukiyo-e artist Suzuki Harunobu was in a fortunate position of having such wealthy friends and patrons. He made a large number of these calendars with intricate designs, and in 1765 he designed prints with 5 or more different colors. With each color perfectly registered, his prints looked like rich nishiki silk brocades. They became known as nishiki-e and were immediately popular, making the production of all previous types of colored prints unprofitable. This was the beginning of the mass production of color prints. Soon, everyone could afford to buy one. As for Harunobu, he continued to make beautiful prints of women and children in domestic settings for another 5 years, until he died suddenly in 1770, not even 50 years old. The next great ukiyo-e artist was Kiyonaga. A member of the Torii school, he was trained to make their typical actor prints, but he felt more inclined to draw women. And that's bijinga, images of beautiful women, that made him famous. While the girls on Harunobu prints are usually very young and so slender that it feels if there is no human body inside the kimono, Kiyonaga drew not girls but women. Tall, gorgeous and confident, like today's supermodels. In the late 1780s, Kiyonaga became the head of the Torii school. So he had to stop drawing what he wanted and go back to painting actors. As the head of the school, his job was not to make prints, but actual paintings to be displayed at the entrance of the theater. The artist who inherited Kiyonaga's fame as the main painter of beauties was Kitagawa Utamaro. The figures of his women became even more elongated and elegant. They were no longer even remotely realistic, but nevertheless exquisite and charming. Utamaro became extremely popular. His prints always sold out, and publishers didn't hesitate to use tons of mica or copper dust to make the backgrounds of Utamaro's work shine. The beauties portrayed by Utamaro all look the same to the modern viewer, but back then people could read the nuances that we don't notice anymore. Clothes and hairstyles, poses and accessories could reveal a lot about the model's character. Some researchers go as far as to say that Utamaro provided a psychological insight into the life of the Yoshiwara pleasure district. Personally, I prefer the position that Utamaro, like other painters before him, captured the essence of beauty rather than the individual features of each model. As Utamaro grew older, so did his art. A new generation of artists, such as Toyokuni, were gaining popularity, but it was so hard for Utamaro to accept that he was no longer the most famous painter in Edo. Utamaro became bitter, spending all his time in Yoshiwara and seeing the other side of the glamorous world of pleasure probably didn't help. In 1804, he created a triptych of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the military lord of the late 16th century, being entertained by his concubines. The prints were not erotic, but very suggestive. Not long before, censorship had been tightened to include a ban on the depiction of warriors who lived after 1573. Utamaro and his publisher knew that, but the people of Edo loved forbidden fruit. Erotic art was also forbidden, but the same Utamaro created plenty of shunga prints, so it was not the first time that he broke the rules. He was very famous, so the authorities let it slide. This time, however, he went a little too far, and now the government wanted to set an example. Even the most prominent artists should obey the rules. Utamaro was arrested and punished by spending a month in handcuffs. Not the comfortable modern kind, but the Edo period ones. That is, his hands were cuffed so tightly that he could not do anything by himself. To need help with the simplest task was humiliating. His spirit was broken. Utamaro slowly withered away after his punishment until he died in 1806. Meanwhile, the world of actor prints was also changing. For example, the role of Torii school in portraying actors was gradually taken over by the Katsukawa school. They used a great sales strategy for their multi-part prints. The prints of all the actors were made separately, but in such a way that prints from the same play could be put together. You could buy just one or the whole collection. And then a mysterious man appeared. His name, his artistic name, was Toshusai Sharaku. He suddenly appeared in May 1794, produced more than 140 prints, and disappeared without a trace just 10 months later. Even today, we still don't know who he was. The people of Edo had no clues either, but they loved a good mystery. Sharaku's prints? Not so much. His first series, 28 close-up portraits, so-called big heads, of famous actors on shiny dark mica backgrounds, caused a lot of controversy. On one hand, they were very different, but on the other, the actors and their fans were used to the flattering images, and Sharaku's portraits were nothing of the kind. If anything, they were caricatures. But who would expect serious drawing from a guy whose name literally means drawing for fun? The portraits, however, sold out, so Sharaku will publish 3 more big series and then disappear. And who knows, maybe he was gone a lot sooner, because his last 2 series look drastically different from the first 2. Created by the real Sharaku or someone else, his art was not really missed. But as I said, the people of Edo loved a good mystery. So when Sharaku disappeared, rumors spread that he had been murdered by an enraged kabuki actor, or that the artist was actually a no actor himself who hated kabuki and drew kabuki actors to make fun of them. Discovered by Western collectors, Sharaku became famous once again. One particularly passionate fan even named him one of the 3 greatest portrait painters in the world, along with Rembrandt and Velázquez. Slowly, the opinions of Japanese art critics and historians also began to change. Sharaku was accepted into the club of important ukiyo-e artists who inspired the next generations of painters. And now I would like to pause for a moment to remind you that the making of ukiyo-e print was a team effort. We mainly know the names of the artists who created the designs, but in the background, an army of carvers and printers turned these designs into objects. And then there were publishers, whose job was to oversee the whole process and look for new talents. For example, there would be no Utamaro and no Sharaku without the publisher Tsutaya Juzaburo, who found them and invested in their talent. Unfortunately, Tsutaya died only 2 years after Sharaku's disappearance, without revealing his identity. With the departure of Sharaku, Tsutaya, and Utamaro, the era of classical ukiyo-e came to an end. Coincidentally, just as the 18th century turned into the 19th. In the 19th century, artists continued to draw beautiful women, kabuki actors, and sumo wrestlers. Ukiyo-e prints would keep being fashion magazines and advertisement brochures, celebrity Instagram posts and travel souvenirs, guidebooks and craft supplies. But the new wave of artists will turn their attention to the new genre, landscape. The new paints will come to Japan from the West, and soon ukiyo-e will travel abroad. So join me next time and you'll find out why landscape became the main genre of ukiyo-e, how Western art and ukiyo-e changed each other, and why ukiyo-e disappeared in the 20th century. Don't worry, it has been revived. Don't forget to subscribe to be notified when the next episode is ready, and consider supporting Japan Explained by writing a review or making a donation. All the links are now conveniently available on japanexplained.com. Talk to you soon. Bye!